911 is not a series I would normally watch. I've always been more of a sci-fi/fantasy person, and dramas and slice of life comedies aren't really my thing. But Tumblr couldn't stop talking about it, so after watching a bunch of clips on YouTube, I decided to give it a go. And I skipped the first season because everyone told me season 1 was bad. Like, I'm actually watching it now. It's bad. It's a bad season. The show follows first responders in LA as they navigate emergencies and their personal lives. It's really good, and I think that's due to the strong characters and ensemble cast. Without them, the show would likely fall apart. The show can be extremely comforting despite having extremely stressful and engaging emergencies. You know, at the end of the episode, the main characters will be fine, and there's no worry about them dying. Let me rephrase that. They'll stress you out into thinking they're gonna die, and then comfort you with the knowledge that they won't. The series Ensemble is also very good at feeling like an extended family without pretending that every single character is super close or have deeper relationship than what's been established on screen. They're not going to pretend that two characters we've barely seen interact are suddenly besties or anything. They don't try and force it. I love Legends of Tomorrow's found family, but there are certain characters that have never interacted, and yet the show will push that they super care about each other. 911 never pushes that the main characters are closer than they are. It works. It does also lead me to want to see characters who almost never interact more. Please have Maddie and Eddie interact and acknowledge that they never do so.
Hey, do you want to talk? What, you and me? Yeah. Can we do that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. We never have before.
No, not in the last 6 years.
911 became so popular that a spin-off series was ordered. 911 Lone Star, which is the same premise as 911, but set in Austin, Texas. It's fine. It exists. It could be worse. It's kind of trash, honestly. And not fun trash, just trash. That doesn't mean that there's no potential in the show, just that there's a lot of garbage in the way. They still do good writing occasionally, but it's just not fully put together. It's messy, but we could try and find the potential. And prepare for a lot of comparisons to 911 in this. I'm not saying 911 is perfect, but it's very easy to compare the spin-off show to the original, especially when they're set in the same universe. I'm not saying the show has to be exactly like 911. In fact, it should be able to stand on its own, given that the spin-off is just set in the same universe with a similar premise, rather than being a spin-off of characters. The pilot for 911 Lone Star is actually better than the pilot for 911. And that's the only time you'll ever hear me say Lone Star is better than the original. The episode starts with firefighters in Texas going to stop a fire when most of them are killed with the exception of Judd Ryder. It cuts to several months later in New York, where Captain Owen Strand is offered a position in Texas to rebuild the firehouse after most of the firefighters were killed. He initially says no, but then discovers that he has lung cancer. Meanwhile, his son TK, also a firefighter, was planning on proposing to his boyfriend when he finds out that he's been cheating on him. He then slips back into using drugs and accidentally overdoses, but luckily Owen and the rest of their crew is able to save him. Owen then decides to take the job in Texas and take TK with him. In Texas, they start to rebuild the firehouse and look for new firefighters to join. He recruits Marjan Marwani, a Muslim woman from Florida, Paul Strickland, a trans man from Chicago, and Mateo Chavez, a Mexican probationary firefighter. He attempts to recruit Judd, but is initially met with resistance. He also meets the paramedic captain, Michelle Blake. Michelle was introduced earlier, harassing her missing sister's ex in an attempt to try and get some answers on where she might be. We also meet Carlos Reyes, a cop who is Michelle's friend and had to pull her off the property. After talking with Judd's wife, Grace Ryder, a 911 operator, Owen gives Judd another call. Judd is angry at the idea of Owen disrespecting his dead friends and bringing up Owen's service on 9/11 as him showboating, till Owen reveals that he has lung cancer. Judd has a breakdown at the tribute Owen made to the lost firefighters, and the episode ends with him officially joining the crew. Judd's gonna get some therapy for the rest of the season. Don't worry, he'll be fine. Just need some therapy. So, like I said, this is a better pilot than 911's. 911's just starts out with a random day for the characters. There's no big event or change as to why we suddenly start following them now. Also, the pilot dialogue can be really cringe.
It's not 1950 anymore, Buck. We work with women side by side. When you swing your dick around, you disrespect them.
This is another reason to skip straight to season 2. Lone Star has done a pretty good job at getting a glimpse at the characters, their dynamics, as well as their arcs for the season. Although you can very much tell that other people are gonna get the focus this season. Owen, Judd, Michelle, and TK are gonna get a lot more screen time, while Grace, Mateo, Marjane, Paul, and Carlos are kinda gonna get screwed over. Wonder what they all have in common. Aside from what would be a problem with the whole season, there's another problem with the pilot. And really, this is a problem that everyone has with the show, which fans have dubbed the Texas filter. If you compare the look of 911 to Lone Star, you notice it, and honestly, you don't need 911 to notice it, because it's just really ugly coloring. Every scene has an orange filter over it, and it is not good. Sometimes I get it. There's a crossover where they're in a wildfire, and it works because it seems like they're trying to have a hot, muggy atmosphere. But that filter stays on the whole show, and it just makes it look really ugly. 911 had a similar filter in season 1, and luckily they got rid of it in season 2, but Lone Star did not learn its lesson. Still, it's a solid start, but it's going to fall apart going forward, especially with the way they treat some of the cast. While 911 technically has a lead in Athena, it is without a doubt an ensemble show. While some may have more focus from episode to episode, there's still something for each of them to do throughout the series. And each one has important roles to play and all have fun interactions and chemistry. Lone Star...
He slayed him. I mean, literally, dude dropped to the ground choking on dirt and his own bile. Don't worry, he lived.
Nancy Gillian, portrayed by Brianna Baker, is a paramedic of the 126. You'll notice that I didn't mention Nancy in the pilot, although she is there. Even though she appears in every episode of season 1 alongside fellow paramedic Timothy Rosewater, they're mostly relegated to the background and don't get any characterization outside of doing their jobs. She gets some characterization at the start of season 2 because they actually allow characters to have screen time this season. Her first storyline is dealing with the death of her friend and fellow paramedic Timothy, followed by dealing with TK after he transfers, and then... Look, she doesn't get a lot. I like her personality though. She seems like she'd come off as pretty abrasive, but is actually pretty sweet. She also just can't deal with things changing, especially when a lot of things change at once. She gets to become closer friends with the 126 Fire fam because Carlos realized that she's highly underappreciated. And that's all I got. She's gonna be a main in season 3, so hopefully we'll get to see more of her then. But for now, she's just a paramedic with lesbian energy. Please let her be a lesbian. I hope she's a lesbian.
Medical technique to remove an object from the throat.
Abdominal thrust.
At which phase of the fire is evidence collected?
Overhaul phase.
The pressure you pump to the tip of a 2.5-inch spray nozzle.
75 psi.
Ignition point of magnesium.
473 degrees Celsius or 883 degrees Fahrenheit.
Don't be smug.
Mateo Chavez, portrayed by Julian Works, is a probationary firefighter for the 126. He's kinda slummed around from firehouse to firehouse and has one last chance to take his firefighter test. He turns out to be dyslexic, which makes it very hard to study. He also immigrated to the US when he was 2 and needs a job in order to stay in the country. He's pretty optimistic and also a total nerd, specifically for Marvel characters. This show airs on Fox, and who is Fox owned by now?
You're falling into the classic Iron Man versus Captain America trap.
Bro, that's not a classic debate. That debate didn't become mainstream till 2012. The debate that's been going on since the dawn of time is Batman versus Superman. Come on. I get it, owned by Disney, but stop pretending that the MCU isn't the reason that 80% of those characters weren't vaulted into the mainstream. Mateo is clearly not a comics nerd. At most, he's an MCU nerd, and there's nothing you could say to sway my opinion on that. And I hope you liked the information we got on Mateo, because that was all from Season 1, and we don't get much else in Season 2. In the crossover, we learned that he has a cousin who's in jail, but really that's a joke because Julian Works played a criminal Marvin in 911. His storylines include getting a tattoo that is misspelled and no one knowing how to tell him. His house burns down and he has to live with Captain Strand, but that stops being about him rather fast. The boy gets no screen time. He's set up to have an arc with him being probationary firefighter, but then they don't really do anything with it outside of the one episode in Season 1 and a quick thing at the end of Season 2. I like seeing him stand up for himself, but I feel like I'm not seeing him get stepped on enough for it to be earned. Also, he's kinda just a sweet bean. Like, himbo-y. I think the sweet bean deserves some more screen time.
Thanks, Cap, but I transitioned on a job in Chicago, and that was hard enough. I don't imagine what things are going to be like down in Texas.
Paul Strickland, portrayed by Brian Michael Smith, is a firefighter from Chicago who transfers to the 126 in Texas. He is also trans. Paul is actually incredibly smart and has a great ability to decipher, figure out problems, and sense danger. He gets along really well with the rest of the 126 and is a good support in many of the other characters' storylines. Meanwhile, all of his storylines just involve transphobia. I am just really not okay with that, and neither are most trans fans of this show. The first episode about him in Season 1 is about him going on a date with a girl he met and not being sure if he should because she doesn't know he's trans. He tells her he's trans and faces transphobia, off screen, but still. Luckily, Carlos and TK make him have a fun night to make him feel better. Probably not what he actually needs, but whatever, heart in the right place. Then there's the Season 2 episode where his mom and sister, Naomi, come to town, and Naomi is being transphobic because she's mad that suddenly her sister was gone and replaced by Paul. The episode ends with Paul apologizing to Naomi for not considering how him transitioning affected her and not letting her say bye to her sister. I fucking hate it. Can Paul have a storyline where he doesn't face transphobia? We've already had 2 in the series. That's enough. It feels like the writers wanted to have a trans character for the sake of rep, but couldn't come up with storylines outside of him experiencing transphobia. Not to call Supergirl a good show, but at least in Season 4 they gave Nia a decent storyline and didn't have her face transphobia all the time. Right now, the only TV series I watch that hasn't had a trans character face transphobia is Star Trek Discovery. Maybe I should watch The Owl House. So Paul's a great character, but he just deserves better storyline. Stop giving Paul transphobia storylines, writers. We get it, you feel the need to highlight this instead of trans people leading normal lives because you've othered them so much and only think about that aspect of their lives. Now get better writing skills.
Well, you can't post that.
Really? Because I already did. Oh, congrats, you guys. You're blowing up.
You are cold-blooded.
Don't ever forget it.
Marjan Marwani, portrayed by Nacha Karam, is my favorite and could be best girl. She is a Muslim firefighter from Florida and is kind of the daredevil of the group. She also has a major social media presence due to her more high-danger rescues going viral. So let's talk about how she's getting screwed over in this show. 2 out of 3 of the episodes that have storylines about her play into Islamophobic stereotypes and misrepresent Muslims, specifically by not doing any research and not listening to Muslim fans when they call them out for this. I am not Muslim. Ergo, this section is not based on my personal experience. This section is going to be me paraphrasing words from Tumblr user zeethebooknerd, who was also kind enough to go over this section and inform me of any mistakes and misconceptions I wrote into it, as well as making sure that nothing gets taken out of context. Her post on how Lone Star has failed at Muslim representation will be linked in the description down below. So Marjan wears a hijab throughout the show, and in episode 3 her hijab falls off during a rescue. Someone films it and it goes viral. As a result, the women at Marjan's mosque belittle her and suggest she find a different one. So this would never happen. Not the part about her hijab falling off, but the part about the women at the mosque belittling her. Most women at the mosque would be understanding and wouldn't be rude about her hijab falling off. Any kind of judgment would come from a cultural context and not a religious one. There is a difference between the two. The resolution of this storyline also is just non-existent. It ends with Paul telling her to keep her head up, but Marjan doesn't get to do anything else. She doesn't go back to the mosque. She doesn't find a new one. If anything, it kind of feels like Paul is saving her religious identity, which Muslims don't need to see non-Muslims doing that. Then there's the arranged marriage episode. So Marjan's fiancé, Salim, arrives in Texas and she tells the team that they've been betrothed since they were kids. The team finds this confusing as they apparently have never heard of an arranged marriage before. Marjan goes on a date with him where he explains that he wants to end their engagement because he wants to go out with someone else, and that Marjan doesn't feel the same way back. Marjan then realizes she does love him and wants to at least tell him that she feels the same before he leaves. He says that he wants a relationship again, and she says that she can't be in a relationship with someone who breaks their promises like that. So to my fellow non-Muslims, this is probably a good story and reflects how most of them see Islam. It's not good, guys. While it is common for families that are close to arranged marriages between their children, they would not have been done at the age that Marjan and Salim were. 12 is too young. Arranged marriages aren't really understood by those who come from a culture where they're not common, but Salim and Marjan were very much harmful stereotypes. When Marjan says,
When you marry for chemistry, there's a 50% divorce rate. You know why ours is 10 times lower? Because we don't start with heat. We believe that love is something you grow into.
that is actually how most Muslims view a relationship. However, Salim rejects those values because he wants a spark, so really throws Marjan's values under the bus there. Them going on a date unchaperoned isn't typical, and Marjan going to Salim's hotel room is also against that. Drinking alcohol just because someone isn't there to watch them, not how the religion works. Salim becomes a racist fuckboy stereotypes and is rude to Marjan for believing in her values. There's more, and again, links in the description down below, but just know that this episode is not a good reflection of what arranged marriages are actually like. While they're not common in the West, they are very common in Eastern cultures, and we need to remember that when discussing and portraying them. Side note, they barely bring up the fact that Marjan is Muslim outside of episodes where they're supposedly teaching the basics of Islam. Yes, they have her wear her hijab, pray on screen, and attend a mosque to complete the image of a Muslim woman, but that's it. And even then, they messed up all three of them. I'm not saying that Legends of Tomorrow is perfect in representation either, but at least they have moments where they bring up that Zari and Behrad are Muslim outside of a let's teach the non-Muslims how religion works, but wrong episode. Hell, the closest they get to that is the episode where Zari is just explaining fasting to the dumbest member of the team. So maybe find ways to incorporate her religion without being Islamophobic or just straight up ignoring it. The only episode about her that doesn't touch on her religion plays more into her social media fame aspects of the character. You can tell that's where the writers are the most comfortable writing her in the series. I am not saying they should stop writing her religion. I am saying that they should hire some Muslim writers and do some research. Marjan starts to question if she is actually being a firefighter to save lives, or if she's only doing it for social media fame when the wife of a man she couldn't save posts a video of her saying hi to a few fans before the rescue insinuates, and she's more concerned with that than saving the victim. She's stuck in a rut when she decides to go apologize to the wife when the wife posts a video that she's going to kill herself. Marjan and Paul save her, and when a paramedic wants to post that she was there on social media, Marjan asks him not to. She did it to save the woman, not for the fame. I actually like this. It's not offensive in any way, and it actually uses previously established aspects of her character to inform the story. It's good. Marjan has a great personality, and there's a lot of aspects of her character that I love. The issue is that the writers keep finding ways to be Islamophobic instead of giving her storylines that would, first of all, show Islam correctly, and secondly, actually give more depth and time to her character. Marjan just deserves better writers.
You mean the investigation onto me? Right, that's what I am to you, an ongoing investigation. Well, you let me know when my captain tells you what to think of me. I'll be interested to know.
Carlos Reyes, portrayed by Rafael Silva, is a gay cop. He is Michelle's best friend and later starts a romantic relationship with TK. In season 2, we find out that his father is a Texas Ranger and didn't approve of him becoming a cop since he thought he was too soft. And I hope you liked all that because that's pretty much all we know about Carlos. He didn't have an episode dedicated to him in season 1, and most of his screen time is spent either supporting Michelle or pursuing a relationship with TK. They really didn't give him much outside of that, and aside from switching from Michelle to his dad, they don't give him anything else in season 2. There's one pretty big thing I'm also not a fan of with his character, which is that he's a gay Latino cop. The gays have a long history of not being fans of cops, in fact, being mercilessly pursued by them in our very long history of existing. If the show really cared and thought about their characters, they would have Carlos wrestle with his position as a cop, because he is part of 2 communities that have been negatively affected by them. I will admit 911 doesn't really do this, but they do have Athena's daughter May actually address this, although not with Athena directly. It could be better, but at least they give it a try. Both shows could do more with this, especially Lone Star, since they really don't have much. Whether the 911 verse is propaganda is a future topic for me, or skip intro, whichever one of us gets to it first. But for now, I just want to discuss how they handle Athena versus how they handle Carlos. Athena is kind of the lead, so she has a lot of screen time and storylines. Honestly, the best way I can explain the difference between the two is how often they're in emergencies. Athena is at a lot of emergencies while Carlos is barely at any. And when he is, he doesn't do much. There's no storylines actively about him being on duty or helping stop crime where it's all just him. The only time dedicated to him on an emergency are all about his relationship with his dad or TK. Compare this to Athena, who had several episodes about her job and still has one-off emergencies that are just her, also adding in emergencies between cops and firefighters. Carlos is just barely a cop in this show, which might be a good thing. Again, possible propaganda, but we're not going to talk about that right now. I guess I could get over the fact that Carlos has nothing to do at his job if he was closer to more members of the main cast, but he has the least defined relationships with everyone else. You know, he's in a relationship with TK, and I guess he gets along enough with Owen. Kind of forced to since he's dating his son. But despite the fact that most of the 126 hang out at his house, he's not really friends with any of them. Eddie on 911 has a similar problem. You really don't see him hanging out with another member of the main cast outside of work besides Buck, who he should be dating. But Eddie actually has a job on this show, and they show it. As a result, he's still with the other cast members. And there's still times where he is with the other main characters one-on-one. Carlos has the least amount of screen time in both seasons, so maybe they'll up him to the second least amount of screen time in season 3. Maybe give him something that doesn't just involve TK.
That was amazing!
I didn't feel a thing.
$50 Shades of Grace.
Grace Ryder, portrayed by Sierra McLean, is a 911 operator and the wife of Judd. She is also Tommy Vega's best friend. She's strong, independent, and really keeps the heart of the show going. She also doesn't take shit. She's doing awesome. She is best girl. Now let's talk about how she deserves more screen time. What, you thought the good character was going to get screen time? What show are you watching? She doesn't have minimal screen time, but it's nothing too far out there. Most of her time in season 1 is spent supporting Judd, but there are a couple of times where she gets to have her own emergencies. Grace really gets her time to shine in season 2, though, when she and Judd get into an accident. This leaves Grace without the ability to walk for a while in her recovery from the accident. Also, she's pregnant that whole time. Like early pregnancy, but girl is going through it. And then they mostly drop it because we need to have another storyline that eats the screen time. Grace is great. She deserves more screen time. Give it to her. Let her form connections with the 126 because it feels like she's very disconnected from everyone else. Not to compare to 911 all the time, but Maddie is also a 911 operator, and you know what? She gets connections outside of her brother Buck and her boyfriend Chimney. She's friends with Athena, and she's got her coworker Josh, although Maddie pretty much has a gay best friend no matter the work, apparently. Back to Grace, I would really like to see some interactions with the other characters that aren't superficial or for 5 seconds. Give me an entire episode of her and Carlos bonding. I think that would be fun.
If you ever find yourself in LA, we should get together.
Sure. I gotta mention, though, I already have a boyfriend, and it's pretty serious, so, But it was really nice meeting you, man. Take care.
Tyler Kennedy Strand, aka TK, portrayed by Ronan Rubinstein, is a firefighter and later paramedic for the 126. He is also the son of firefighter Captain Owen Strand and later becomes Carlos's boyfriend. TK is actually a pretty complete character and has a lot of arcs. The first thing we learn about him outside of his relationship with his dad and that he's gay is that he used to be an addict. When he relapses after the breakup with his almost fiancée, that actually becomes part of his arc for the first season, although not much. They bring it up for the first episode and then in episode 4 when he allows himself to get beat up by a bunch of guys at a bar, as well as a few references here or there for the rest of the series. I think it's fine and they don't overly reference it, but sometimes it feels like they rush the consequences of his relapse. He gets a question of career in both seasons. At the end of season 1, he questions whether or not he wants to continue being a firefighter, which was a weird one-episode storyline. He then has another career crisis after he finds out his mom is pregnant and decides to switch to being a paramedic. I like this switch, if nothing else for the fact that it allows the paramedics to be explored and not just on the side like they were in the first season. TK is pretty funny as well. You can tell that he and Buck were cut from the same cloth, and why else do you think they get along so well in the crossover? No one could have predicted that. But TK also has a lot of anger issues. He comes off as more angsty than Buck, and it's not a big thing, but it is established pretty early on. No one really confronts TK on this, and I really need it acknowledged because those anger issues lead to one of my least favorite moments in the show. I don't really have any complaints about TK. He gets a decent amount of screen time and has full complete arcs every season. There's the occasional hiccup, and again, I would like those anger issues acknowledged, but other than that, he's great.
Michelle Blake, paramedic captain. And this scene is medical, so I run the call.
Whoa. Since when does EMS tell fire what time it is?
You didn't read the Travis County manual, did you?
I'm more of a visual learner.
In Texas, EMS calls the shots involving medical emergencies. So you do what I say, Captain.
Michelle Blake, portrayed by Liv Tyler, is the paramedic captain who is searching for her missing sister. I feel the need to point out that I didn't realize Liv Tyler was R1 until a recent conversation with a friend of mine. And to be fair, I've never seen her in anything else, so I feel like I'm allowed to not realize things about actors. Michelle annoyed me sometimes, if I'm being honest. She was so stubborn and didn't listen to anyone. I don't know, I wasn't really invested in finding her sister. Like, I wasn't not invested, but it took up a lot of screen time and was all her character did. So even though she was the second lead in the show, she was definitely the character I was most okay with leaving. I think she has a really complete arc. I'm pretty sure other people would know what to do with her, but besides a possible romance with Owen, I don't know what they were gonna do.
Matt, you ready?
Yeah.
Seems medical.
Sure, we only get one shot at this.
Michelle Blake is a rock star.
Best EMS captain in
I can
all of
recognize
Texas.
that.
Raising the
Oh my God, her arm.
About to go in the front.
You haven't been in the field?
I wasn't ready.
What if I just don't have it anymore? Lord help me.
Tommy Vega, portrayed by Gina Torres, is the paramedic captain starting in season 2. After Michelle leaves, Tommy is called back to the 126 since she went into retirement when she got pregnant with her 2 twin daughters. Her husband's restaurant went under during the pandemic and they needed her to go back to work. Tommy is pretty strong and independent and is actually a pretty good mom. She's also a really great paramedic and is pretty motherly to the other paramedics sometimes. I guess my only complaint is that most of her storylines are just her getting used to being a working mom again. I'd like to see more from her in the following season. I really can't go into specifics about her storyline because it's the same every episode that focuses on her. Overall, great character, would like to see more from her.
Heavy is the head that wears the helmet.
Heavy is the head.
Well, you could have told me that before asking me to put it on, you know.
Then you might not have taken the job. Look, Judd, I chose you to hold down the fort because I know who you are.
I appreciate that, Cap.
Judd Ryder, portrayed by Jim Parrick, is the last living firefighter from the 126. He has a lot of PTSD, not just from witnessing this, but from other events in his childhood. He's the husband of Grace and best friends with Tommy Vega. Oh no, I'm emotionally attached to another cishet white man. How dare they make him well-written and likable. Judd is just so great. He's a nice guy. And not a fake nice guy, he's actually nice, but does have a lot of emotional complexity as well. And he drinks not only respects women juice, but also I love my wife more than anything juice.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Like I would walk through fire so that Grace knows I love her. She knows I love being married to her, right? So that she knows she's safe.
This man deserves his wife. Judd's PTSD from the death of all his friends is explored in the first season. He goes to therapy. It puts a strain on his marriage with Grace at certain points. It's pretty deeply explored. There's a little bit more explored when Judd offhandedly mentions during the crossover that he went to an at-risk camp as a kid. We then see in Amazing Grace, best episode of the show, that he became suicidal after he caused the death of his friend in a car accident. He's also a great leader. He knows what to do in Texas-specific emergencies and even takes the lead on them. He listens to his team, and even when he occasionally butts heads with some of them, he will still take a moment to talk about their problems. You can tell that he really cares about them all, even if they're not the 126 he had before. He just cares so much and loves everyone. I wish he was captain of the 126! All of these characters, they're great. They have a lot of possible interesting storylines that could happen to them and have the possibility to grow. It's just that they don't. Because of...
I'm gonna give you some advice. Proby, you listening?
Mm-hmm. To the both of you.
Good. Good, because you should hear this in stereo. Never, ever get too comfortable.
I'm not saying every problem I have with this show would be fixed if Owen Strand was no longer there. But what I am saying is that if he was gone, it would allow the characters to have more screen time and solve about 80% of the problems I have with this show. Rob Lowe portrays Owen Strand, a firefighter from New York who was a first responder on 9/11 and finds out that he has cancer before transferring to the 126. So this is way too over the top. There's something inherently good about the simple backstories of the 911 characters. Even when they have more tragic ones, they're still simple. None of them are heroes or praised, they're just normal people. Owen gets to be the hero. One of his first scenes is people telling him he's great. Thanks, I hate it. Owen gets significantly more screen time than everyone, and almost every episode has a plot about him. Just when you think there's going to be an episode where he's not important, they will throw in something where he gets to be the savior of the whole thing. Thanks, I hate it. Alright, I'll stop saying that now. Just assume I'm saying it every time I breathe. Season 1 is so much about Owen, and sometimes the plots are really stupid. Like, he has an anxiety dream about losing his hair at one point, and it's just so fucking weird and plays into a really big thing that I hate about him. He's so vain. I get it, Rob Lowe is good looking. I got that correct, right? Rob Lowe is appealing to the people who are attracted to men, right? And there's nothing wrong with a guy caring about his appearance, but it feels like that's his only hobby. He's this vain guy who cares about his appearance, and 80% of his home life is trying to be bougie. We get it, you work a government job and can somehow afford to pay for luxuries even when you lived in New York City, which is way more expensive. I also have a government job and live in the suburbs. Where's my expensive place and nice backyard? I guess we should get into the actual storyline, but Rob Lowe has so much that we're not going to be able to cover it all. We're going to skip over the episode where we talk about his boner problems. Yes, that was an actual plot in this show. After his cancer discovery and moving to Texas, he's got like 3 storylines going on at the same time. He actually gets an overall story arc every season. Sure would like for Marjan to have one of those. So his first is that he's dealing with the possible side effects of the cancer and the medication. Then he's struggling how to tell TK because it took him like 3 months to tell his son that he has cancer. Then he's challenged by another firefighter captain to run the 126. Then he gets a girlfriend and TK gets shot, and that's it for season 1. All that happens in 10 episodes. And some of them take place over the course of more than 1 episode. Season 2. God, I think season 2 is so much more annoying than season 1. And no one denies this. Some people actually liked Owen then, which I am constantly confused by. But no one likes Owen in season 2, and everyone pretty much just wants him gone at this point. Okay, how many storylines does Owen get this season? Well, when TK's mother gets stuck quarantining with them during the pandemic, she and Owen start hooking up. Then Owen finds out that his cancer is mostly cleared up aside from a little bit that they need surgery for. Gwen and Owen then enter a official relationship, maybe. They don't actually know what they are, and at the end of episode 4, an episode meant to be about Marjan, he decides to propose to her, and she says no, only to announce that she's pregnant. Then they decide whether or not to keep the baby. Then it turns out that the baby is not Owen's, it's Gwen's ex-boyfriend's, and she goes back to New York. And that's just the first half of the season. Oh, I forgot about the plot where he gets to use detective work despite being a firefighter captain to try and find TK after he was kidnapped. It's okay, he's fine. Then in the second half of the season, just when there is about to be a storyline about Mateo's house getting burned down, it turns out Owen canceled the surgery to remove the last of his cancer. Which is pointless because by the end of the episode, he just plans to go through with it anyway. Then he gets the surgery and... I'm gonna skip this arc for now because I have a whole section dedicated to it. Just know that in the arc, the 126 gets blown up. It's okay, everyone's fine. Then, when he gets a follow-up from the doctor, he gets to play hero to a hostage situation. Then, in the last episode of the season, he gets offered a promotion that would basically keep him away from being captain of the 126. I wanted him to take the promotion so badly, because then there's a possibility that he would not be on the show anymore. But he doesn't accept it, and the promotion was given to Billy, who tells the 126 that it's getting shut down after the department reads a money-saving proposal written by Owen. Way to go, Owen, you fucked up. Should have taken the comfy desk job when you had the chance. Season ends with Owen punching Billy in the face because screw other characters having moments. Owen just eats at the screen time and stops other characters from having interesting stories or having their stories be expanded. And I know it may not seem like a lot when you boil the storylines down to a sentence, but they will, in fact, drag it out for so long. And there's even more. I didn't even mention that he gets PTSD from the death of Nancy's best friend. Not Nancy. He does. There are times in the original 911 where storylines will get multiple episodes, but man, at least other characters will have a storyline that does get to be the A-plot. The continuing storyline will typically be the B-plot, and none of those storylines will be super high stakes either. The ones with higher stakes are typically done in one episode, or were left over from a cliffhanger at the end of the last one. Owen's storyline is always the main focus, or if it's not the main focus, it will be the main focus the following episode. I would like for someone else in the show to be the main focus for once. And I know that they'll never get rid of Owen. Because guess who the fucking producer of this show is? Rob Lowe. So Rob Lowe, egomaniac that he is, gets all the screen time and doesn't realize how much he's taking it away from the other characters. Why? Because he's Rob Lowe and I hate his stupid face. So the most annoying character is the lead, and he won't leave because he also produces the goddamn show. Thanks, I hate it. I know people really love Tarlos, and I need to start this out by saying they are not bad representation. They're not the greatest, they're pretty average, but they're not garbage. It's just that they very much don't appeal to me for what I want from couples in television. And really what that comes down to is that I'm always going to prefer a slow burn over something fast-paced. I want to be screaming and crying by the time the couple gets together. It's kind of hard to do that when they're making out by episode 2. literally. It's really rushed, and for some reason, Carlos wants to try having a relationship with TK right after, despite knowing almost nothing about him. This continues for the whole season, and it's so hard to tell what their status is in some episodes. Sometimes they're super friendly and seem to be in a relationship, and then others it's like they're complete strangers. It also seems like they're going to break up at the end of the season after TK gets shot, but then are just together in the final moments. Then in season 2, I guess they're in love and have moved in together, and I'm just left to question why. Why do you two like each other? We don't really get any scenes that show the things they like about each other. Most of the time it's makeout sessions, problems with their parents, or problems with their relationships. I don't want to do what I'm about to do, and feel free to hate me for this, but I'm about to compare them to Fan and 911 Ship Buddy. I'm joking, I'm going to compare them to Madney. Maddie and Chimney are really cute and have a lot of development. Yes, I know season 2 of 911 had more episodes than season 1 of Lone Star, but bear with me. I'm just using it to explain why Tarlos' development doesn't work. From the beginning, Maddie thinks Chimney is cute, but it's not really pushed until a few episodes later when we see that they've been hanging out a lot more. We get to see how well they work together and what makes them a good couple. And after they both recover in the hospital after the attack/kidnapping of Maddie's ex-husband, they recognize that things have now changed between them. They can't really go back to how things were and stop hanging out with each other even though they still like each other. But at the end of the season, they still want to be together and instead embrace that things won't be the same as they enter a relationship. Then the rest of the show we get to see the relationships, and they don't have stupid arguments or fights. They talk about their problems and help figure out each individual issue. You really see why they should be together, as well as seeing where they make compromises for each other without it being damaging to the individual or the relationship. Tarlos, most of their relationship is either making out or having problems with their relationship. Tarlos just doesn't have a lot there, and I might be the only person uncomfortable with this, but, they're just so sexual. And I get that sex can serve a point for a narrative, but it feels like a lot of their dialogue is really sexual. My friends joke that there should be a Bechdel test for lesbians, but instead of men, it's referencing sex or sexual stuff called the Boyasha test. Critical Role stands are gonna hate me for that one. Carlos and TK would pass the Boyasha test for the show overall, but if you did it on an episode-by-episode basis, I think there's probably one where they would pass. It doesn't help that their relationship started as a hookup. And you can have decent relationships develop from hookups. It's not impossible. But Lone Star didn't really do that. There's not many scenes where you get why they like each other, or even scenes where we get to see small moments in their relationship. Where's a moment like Chimney spending Christmas with Maddie and helping her enjoy the holiday again? Or like the one where Karen supports Hen on her first day of medical school. Or the scene where David is completely exhausted and kind of done with Michael while also being supportive. Or scenes of Bobby and Athena just casually having dinner dates. Or the scene where Eddie tells Buck that Buck would become the legal guardian of his son if he dies, and then calls him Evan and reinforces that Buck isn't expendable and it was ripped right out of someone's fan fiction. Jesus Christ! What? I said I wasn't going to compare the two. That doesn't mean I don't ship it. And there's also the fact that TK gets angry at Carlos pretty easily. I'm not a fan of it. Anytime there's a small problem, TK feels the need to be angry with Carlos, especially for problems that aren't a big deal and he should have some kind of understanding for. Like the scene where Carlos introduces TK to his parents as his friend and not his boyfriend. Instead of being supportive and trying to understand why Carlos didn't introduce TK as his boyfriend, he just gets mad about it. And then there's the scene where Carlos has to tell TK that Owen's been arrested. Oh, we'll get to that bullshit. And this is how TK reacts.
So you're saying it now? You saying my dad's a criminal, Carlos? Are you saying my dad's a criminal?
I'm supposed to want you two together, right? Just, can Lone Star fix this? I don't want them to pretend that it's never happened. I want them to acknowledge it and then fix it. Otherwise, this couple is just going to continue to leave a bad taste in my mouth. And this is just me, but I am a little uncomfortable with how fast the production started to use the ship name. It's literally by episode 2. It was so fast that I almost thought they came up with it. Either that or people came up with the ship name the second the first promo came out. Which is a problem for a variety of reasons, but a conversation for a different day. Sometimes it feels like they really rushed with Tarlos just to satisfy Buddy fans. I'm not saying that it's the reason Tarlos exists, but if it is, that's not how it works. You really can't do a one-to-one switch over like that. Especially when Buddy is a relationship between two friends growing and caring for each other. And Tarlos is make-out session, now we're together. I think they expected everyone to instantly love it just because it's gay. And if I was 14, I would think Tarlos is the greatest thing ever just for that reason. But I'm 23 now. I'm gonna need more than that. And I am not a monolith on Tarlos. My opinion does not represent the entirety of the Lone Star fandom. Hell, it barely represents a percentage. These have just been the reasons that I have not been satisfied with them as a couple. One of the most well-known moments of this show is a scene where an old lady is racist towards her neighbors and then fakes a heart attack to get out of being arrested. Each member of the 126 tries to help her, but she's racist towards Mahjong. Owen's not certified. TK informs her that he's gay. Judd just says no, and when Paul says he's trans, she lets up and just tells them to take her to jail. This scene is hilarious. And sad, but mostly hilarious. The show early on made an effort to bring up how diverse it is in its promos. But I want to point out that 911 is also diverse. You do get different forms of representation in both. 911 has representation for black men and women, lesbian and gay black people, Latino representation, Korean representation, as well as representation of survivors of domestic abuse. Lone Star has gay representation, Latino rep, trans rep, Muslim rep, and dyslexia rep. People like to say that Lone Star is more diverse, but that's actually not true. If we just go by race, there's only 3 white people in the main cast of both shows by season 2. But of the 3 remaining, Maddie is a domestic abuse survivor in an interracial relationship, and TK is a gay recovering drug addict in an interracial relationship. So really non-diverse mains are down to 2 for both shows. And they could knock both of those out by 911 letting Buck be bi, and Lone Star just getting rid of Rob Lowe. Just do it, please. For the love of God, just do it. This man turns... Neither show is more diverse than the other. It all just depends on what kind of diversity you're looking for. I will acknowledge that Lone Star is representing 2 groups that aren't typically seen in the media in a positive light. That being trans and Muslim representation. And that's what I think fans mean when they say that Lone Star is more diverse than 911. They're representing groups that aren't shown as much in the media. Either that or they think TK and Carlos are the height of representation. Really hope it's the first one. Despite everything I just said, there is a very big problem with representation on Lone Star. As I've expressed before, Rob Lowe eats up the screen time, so all the characters have less of it. But most of the people of color on the show get even less screen time than their white counterparts. I swear, if Tommy wasn't Gina Torres, her screen time would probably be halved. And it's painfully obvious, especially when we get to the end of the season and you see what storylines are getting wrapped up. Because the characters that don't have a moment to have their storylines end are the ones that don't have any storylines to begin with. It's painfully obvious, and they tend to stereotype each and every one of the diverse characters. So the show will really push in its advertising that it's championing diversity, but then not give any of the diverse characters any screen time or storylines where they're not being discriminated against. In the first episode, Paul, Marjan, and Mateo are the only ones being interviewed. And Marjan and Paul are the only ones to come out of state. TK says this.
Dad, you bring this guy in, people here would lose their minds.
About Paul. Something about these things combined together makes it feel like the writing staff is implying that trans and Muslim people don't exist in Texas. Like, I get it, the South isn't good for any non-cis-het white person, but they're in Austin. The show takes place in Austin. Austin. One of the most blue areas in Texas. LGBT and Muslim people exist there. Hell, they show that Muslim people exist there when Marjan goes to mosque. And even if this is the most blue part of Texas, LGBT and POC exist everywhere. I don't know if you're aware of that. Even the most rural of areas. You didn't have to fly them in from different states. And don't give me the accent excuse. The only two characters from Texas that actually speak with a southern accent are Judd and Grace. Everyone else has a Midwest one. It doesn't help that the writer's room doesn't seem to reflect the cast. There's not a lot of diversity in the writer's room. Wow, we went from a deep discussion on diversity to the emergencies on the show. I'm great at segues. So the emergencies are very much an afterthought in this show. It's like the show forgets that they're supposed to happen unless it's a giant one. They're ways to cause drama for characters and not just letting them breathe. 911 would sometimes just have an emergency. Yes, there were episodes where all the emergencies would fit into a theme, or the emergency would have some relevance to the plot, but other times they'd just go out on a call. Take, for example, Season 4, Episode 3, where Eddie and Hen help a woman who suddenly went blind. It has no bearing on the plot or personal lives of the characters, but was just the characters doing their jobs. The only time that really happens in Lone Star is occasionally the cold open, and the emergencies don't hit as hard. At least once a season, there is an emergency that I cry over in 911. You will know these people for less than 5 minutes, and you will just break down over their situations. You will sob over this woman who loses her husband to COVID and is 5 minutes from giving up. The woman who is dying and tells her daughter to let go. And you cry over the flashbacks. This guy who's on screen for barely a minute and dies on the call when he drowns. The kid who has to give his mom CPR and is just desperate for help. The man who dies while proposing to his girlfriend. The only time Lone Star got to me was the astronaut who died on the phone with his daughter. And most of the emergencies don't even get you that invested. Even though I find 911 very comforting, it will make you forget about that comfort at any moment. It is nothing but stress. You are invested or whether or not these people are going to die. And sometimes they don't make it. Lone Star just doesn't get that investment as often. I'm not saying Lone Star can't or is incapable of having emotionally hitting emergencies. There are people who do feel emotions from them. I think 80% of the tag is always just like talking about the 30 seconds of Tarlos we got that episode. So this arc is 2 episodes long, and it feels like it's dragged out even longer than it is. I hate it. Apparently this arc was originally going to be for 911, but then they traded it out for the sniper plot at the end of the season. I feel like 911 would have done it better. Which pretty much my stance on everything in Lone Star, because then Rob Lowe wouldn't be there. I feel like they wouldn't make Bobby the main focus of the Arson Arc. Like, maybe they'd choose Michael to be the main focus, or even Hen. Hen would 100% get into an arsonist conspiracy theory. She'd be good at it and make it entertaining, and she wouldn't make that many stupid decisions. I should actually talk about these episodes before I start roasting them. So the episode starts with a cold open of Owen getting arrested, but then cuts to a week earlier when he just got out of surgery. He's extremely bored while recovering and ends up going to talk to Billy Tyson, whose cancer came back and is not working. He introduces Owen to an app where you can hear radio calls for the police and fire department. It's so stupid how Owen gets involved in this plot. He starts showing up at specific fires and believes that there is an arsonist plot going on. He then buys a bunch of equipment to try and test out possible theories on how the arsonist is committing these crimes. That was not smart, Owen. Now when they search your house, you'll be easy to blame. Owen then goes to where one of the previous fires was lit when the arsonist knocks him out and sets the building on fire. He is rescued by Billy, who will be suspected of this crime. Second episode, Owen is then 2 hours late to dinner at TK and Carlos's place with Carlos's parents. Father of the Year. He then asks a bunch of questions to Carlos's dad, Gabriel, about the fires. He's a Texas Ranger and starts to suspect that Owen is the one behind them. Owen is then arrested and interrogated by Gabriel and Dennis Raymond. This leads to the bad scene between Carlos and TK. I hate it. Dennis Raymond appeared in the previous episode to take Owen's statement on the first fire he suspected of arson. He points the finger at Billy, but there's no evidence. Then there's a call from a hospital that someone who survived a fire had woken up, and it cuts to Dennis turning out to be the arsonist. Then it's revealed that Owen, Gabriel, and Billy had teamed up to trick Dennis so that he wouldn't know they were onto him. Then when Dennis is arrested, he makes some vague threats, and it turns out he set some more bombs.
You took the most important thing in the world from me. And now I am going to repay the favor.
Okay, you two dads who have kids who exist on the show and live together, question what that could be. Oh, clearly it's the firehouse. The firehouse gets blown up, but everyone is fine. And Dennis Raymond kills himself by lighting himself on fire. You know, I like stupid of the fun variety. This is not fun. This is just weird and depressing. So they settle down for the night. TK and Carlos are over their issues, which are handled off screen. This is why it's so hard for me to be invested in them as a couple. Owen realizes that Dennis was going to hit TK and Carlos and races off with Judd, Tommy, and Billy to their house. TK and Carlos have sex and their house catches fire, all while Fever by Peggy Lee plays in the background. Context for how I feel about weird music placements. One of my favorite moments in Pacific Rim Uprising is when I Wanna Know What Love Is plays in the background as Newt drifts with a kaiju. My second favorite fight scene of all time is from Legends of Tomorrow, where they fight to the Thong Song by Cisco. These are great because they're comedic. This is just uncomfortable. Like, really uncomfortable. Even without the almost sex that the fandom overgift to no end, it's just weird. Why? Anyways, they're able to save Carlos and TK, and aside from the fact that their place burned down, everything is fine. Till Tommy comes home and finds her husband dead. Can we get a break here? I really hate this. Especially when it leads to the stupid cliffhanger from the finale, and we'll get there. There's too many fake outs, it leads to a really unsatisfying villain, and the reason is even more unsatisfying. Owen and Gabriel being bad parents, the 126 being burned down means the status quo is dead, and I hate that. Then there's the part where they fake you out that Tarlos is going to die, only to save them and have Tommy suffer instead. Honestly, it was stupid that Charles just died when we barely got to know him, and barely was able to resonate with the audience. And from the moment that Owen gets arrested and to the moment that Charles dies, it all happens over the course of a day and a half. 2 days at most. So to break more of your suspension of disbelief, Tarlos had a fight, TK questioned where he lived, and got back to not sleeping on the couch over the course of less than 48 hours. And I thought Supernatural was great at speed runs. Very few episodes of 911 take place over the course of that short amount of time. And normally those episodes are because they're dealing with one emergency, like the earthquake, or the pileup, or the tsunami. And that's not saying there aren't Lone Star episodes that work and take place over the course of a day. But the fact that 20 different events are happening in under 48 hours and we don't even get a moment to breathe? The stakes of a show like this aren't the big plot twists or the action set pieces. It's meant to be about the characters. That's what we're invested in. Why can't the show realize that and put the effort in there? So sometimes this show ends up doing the same thing as 911. And I know I just spent the entire character section explaining why the cast needs to be an ensemble like 911, but I'm not talking about in terms of screen time and all that. I'm talking about their need to have the same storylines as 911 at the same time. It becomes kind of obvious when you watch both shows. Right from the first episode, this is a problem. In the mid-season finale of Season 3, Athena's ex-husband Michael is revealed to have cancer. Throughout the rest of the season, that is his arc, dealing with his cancer and possibly dying soon, leaving his kids without a father. Guess what storyline Rob Lowe gets in Season 1? Why, he's got cancer, of course. He gets more screen time with it than Michael did, though. Which isn't surprising. Fuck you, Rob Lowe, get off my TV. Then there's the pregnancy storylines. At the end of Season 3, Maddie and Chimney find out that Maddie is pregnant, thus becoming their storyline for the next season. At the start of Season 2, Rob Lowe reconnects with TK's mom, Gwen, and she gets pregnant, which is such an exhausting storyline. Then, halfway through the season, after that garbage, it's revealed that Grace is pregnant. And that's fine, they don't really touch on it, and we'll probably get more focused next season. Jed and Grace deserve to have a baby. It's just that in 2021 TV season, there have been 3 pregnancy storylines in the 911 verse. It can drag a lot. There's some smaller stuff as well. There's that TK is a drug addict and can't do substances just like Bobby. There's the episode where the 118 gets jinxed and then Judd jinxes the 126 a few episodes later. Let's face it, the reason TK and Buck get along so well in the crossover is because Buck is the template for TK. There's Eddie losing his wife Shannon at the end of his intro season and Tommy losing her husband Charles at the end of her intro season. Both of those characters deserved so much better. TK and May's drug overdoses, including having the main character find them passed out. I don't know, I just think it feels really obvious when you watch both shows. And I get that some people find the similarities fun, but other times it just feels like the writers ran out of ideas for characters and storylines. I think you can really see how Lone Star fails against 911 by looking at the way both shows do finales. No season of 911 ends with a cliffhanger. They end with possible new storylines and character arcs, but there's not a big overall thing we have to wait several months to be solved. At the end of Season 2, the question is, how will Buck recover and stay a firefighter? At the end of Season 3, it's how will Maddie and Chimney deal with being parents? At the end of Season 4, it's supposed to be, how is Albert going to handle being a firefighter? But really, I'm just questioning how they're going to no-homo Buck and Eddie after Eddie told Buck that he would legally leave his son to him if he died. I don't know what the questions are for most of the characters for the Lone Star Season 1 finale. What's going to happen with Carlos and TK's relationship is a question, but everything else is just full meh. I have no idea what to expect from anyone next season, especially given how little screen time everyone but a few of them got. I have no fanfiction ideas based on the ending. Season 2 ends with Tommy getting a character-focused plot to follow next season. How she deals with being a single mother and having a career. But then there's the other plot to follow next season. You know, how are we getting the 126 back after Owen inadvertently caused it to get shut down? So instead of an emotional or character-based question, it's a plot-based question. How are we going to get back to the status quo? And that's not a fun question. The status quo is really what makes 911 work. Regardless of what happens in the show, all the firefighters can return to the 118 and get to work. Athena can continue what she does, and someone can keep answering the emergency calls. You don't have to keep worrying about a big shift. And yes, sometimes you want the more dramatic parts of television, but 911 is comforting. Lone Star isn't. Lone Star wants you to be more invested in plot than characters, and wants you to think Rob Lowe is the best character ever. But it fails at both of these. Lone Star is still formatted like 911. A weekly show where there's mostly no major shakeups to the formula. But it constantly puts those shakeups in the show, and it can be really distracting and take you out of it. Instead of being invested, you're questioning why you want to be. Thank you all for watching. All of this has been my opinion or personal experience. Feel free to leave your own in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on Lone Star? Let me know. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and support me on social media in the links down below. I will see you all next time.